Thank you all for attending our final session of the day. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have three attorneys on the panel. We have Reggie Koch from the Koch Law Firm. We have Sarah Everett from the ACLU. And we have Becky McHughes from the McHughes Law Firm, who is also the president of the Arkansas Creditors Bar Association. Mr. Koch, if you would go ahead and begin for us.
Okay, sure. Thank everybody for coming, and thank you for having me back again this year. It's always a pleasure to come talk to folks here. And today I'm going to talk about a lawsuit that I was involved in as a participating attorney with the ACLU this past year against the city of Sherwood. Some of you know me and you know my history with Sherwood, but I'm going to go over it very briefly because I want to talk about the lawsuit and not a broader subject. But the lawsuit has to do with a big problem that we have across this nation and certainly in this state, and that is that when it comes to municipalities, the fines and costs that are paid to the court and the supporting of the municipality is largely carried on the backs of the poorest people. And this happens, you'd think that if you wanted to get money out of a group of people that you would go toward the richest people, right? If I were wanting to market to people, I'd want to market to rich people, not to poor people, because the rich people have the money. But when it comes to civil rights, it doesn't work that way. The rich people have the money to hire an attorney and to defend themselves. One paradigm that I would mention is that, your average local attorney, the fee that your average local attorney would charge to defend you, say for shoplifting or DWI or something, often is 2 or 3 or 4 times the amount that the fine would be. And then they cannot guarantee you that they will win your case, so you may have to pay them and still pay the fine. So even if they're not guilty, even if they absolutely believe they're not guilty, there is a huge incentive, it seems like, to them to simply pay the fine and go on. Now, what we have some places doing is capitalizing on that, and Sherwood was one of those places. Now, I worked for Sherwood as a police officer for many years, and even as a young police officer this was before my education, before I cared anything about civil rights, even then, we joked about our warrant officers. We had 3 times as many warrant officers as Little Rock did at Sherwood, which Little Rock has hundreds of police officers. Sherwood had at that time like 50. And we had 3 or 4 times more warrant officers. And the reason is because they found that they could make a lot of money, an enormous amount of money, prosecuting hot checks. And they began doing that, and the warrant officers at Sherwood would serve the hot check warrants. And I never wanted to be a warrant officer. A lot of us talked about it, and we laughed and said, they're bill collectors with guns. That's what they are. They're bill collectors with guns. But it was very profitable. For decades, they made millions and millions. They built that whole complex out there on these hot check warrants. And here's how it would go down. Most of the time, your hot check violators are not your calculating criminals. There are a few exceptions. There are, sometimes you hear of these kiting schemes where someone will open several bank accounts and write a check on this one and then write a check on this one to cover that one and write a check on that one to cover that. And it's like this scheme where at the end they run off with a lot of money and the banks are left, That's pretty rare. Matter of fact, I don't ever remember seeing a case like that at Sherwood. I kind of heard some rumors, but most of the time it's single mothers who need some money for their kids to feed them, and they write a check for pizza. That's your average hot check violation at Sherwood. And the way that would go down is they write a check, and in this lawsuit, we had many people that we talked to who 7 or 8 years ago, they wrote a check or 2 checks or 3 checks, and the total of the checks may have been $60 or $80 or $100. And now, 7 or 8 years later, they have paid thousands and thousands of dollars, spent several days in jail intermittently, and now they're down to where they only owe $1,500 more and they can pay off the $60 worth of checks. And here's how that would happen. When someone would write a couple of hot checks for some pizza or something, then, they've got the $60 worth. Well, right away, Sherwood would throw on several $100s in fines. I don't remember the amounts, but let's just say it was $300, So they throw on like $300, now it's $360. And well, the people didn't have the money for pizza to begin with, right? Well, the last thing that these agencies that do this really want them to do is to come in with $360 and pay it off. There's no money in that. Well, there's a little bit of money. What they would rather them do is to come in, and people can come up with a little money when it comes to getting out of jail. They can usually call mom and dad or sister or somebody and come up with $100, $150. So they'd do that. You've got this fine here of several $100s. What can you come up with? Well, I can come up with $150. Bring it in. Come in and they pay that fine. Well, they've already got the vendor paid off, the person who lost the money. They're already paid off, right? Now they've got this person, and they're going to put them on a treadmill. And they're going to make them the easy pay plan. They're going to make them pay, $25 or $30 or $50 a month, and years and years to pay, But of course, they know that the difficulty of not having a lot of money is that sometimes you miss a payment. And sure enough, they're going to miss a payment. And then they get a warrant for failure to pay. They add on another $200 or $300 or $400, and they usually make them come in and pay, a couple $100s to get out of jail again, and then right back on the treadmill. And that's how it goes. And it was hundreds and hundreds of cases over the years just like that. It was seldom, warrant officers at Sherwood, I knew them all back in the day, and they seldom ever served a warrant for burglary or rape or murder or anything like that. No, there just weren't very many of those kinds. I'm going to put a timer on here, otherwise I'll talk all day here. Give myself some. That wasn't what it was. This was a money-making thing, okay? So I was very happy. When I left Sherwood, I filed a lawsuit against them. I've sued them several times over the years, and I have a lot to say about their practices, and not much of it's good, but I was really happy when they got in touch with me. I didn't bring this lawsuit myself. The ACLU and some New York attorneys got in touch with me just because of the reputation they had for suing Sherwood and knowing the people over there. And so I was happy to climb on board and help them with this. And so we filed a lawsuit. We even sued the district court judge, which is very rare. Very rarely can you successfully sue a judge. And it's very tight criteria when you go to suing a city and a judge this way over this kind of thing. It's very difficult. And I'm not going to go into the law of it. There's what they call the Younger Doctrine. I think that's what it's called. And basically, all the stars have to line up for you. If the federal courts will say that, well, the state still has an interest in this, and you haven't let this run its course, and you have this very intricate thing you have to maneuver. And the local federal judge didn't think we had done that. So we were on track to have this case dismissed and lose it. However, nationwide, some of these cases are going up, and the appellate courts are upholding them, and there are some good things happening. Unless you're the city, then there's some bad things happening. And so while we were on track to have the case dismissed because our clients didn't exactly fit that very straight and narrow path that we have to get them through to get them into trial, at the same time, the city did not want this to go on appeal and possibly the horrible thing happen, get a precedent set where they're liable and they're defended by the municipal league who defends most of the cities in the state. And so the last thing they need is for the doors, the floodgates to just be opened for these lawsuits, because they know that it goes on everywhere. So the bad thing was we were on track to lose it. The good thing was they didn't want it to be appealed, so they did work out a settlement, and we did get some things changed. We did make some progress. Some of the things they were guilty of, or that we accused them of being guilty of, was not letting other people come in the courtroom with the defendant. making the defendant sign, just come up and saying, sign this. And what it was a waiver of an attorney. They would bring the people up very close to the judge and sort of whisper to them so that other people couldn't hear what was going on. We actually had a monitor, different times go in there and sit and try to listen, and they had trouble even hearing what the judge was saying. Not like a public court forum that you would normally imagine, right? We got a lot of those things changed. Now they're being recorded. We can monitor that to some extent. They're not going to keep people out. It's a public forum again. And we got some things, some positive things. One of the things that we were not able to do that really upset me, but I mean, I wasn't funding this, so I didn't have the final word, but one of the things we were not able to do is to get a public defender. The public defender over there works for them. Well, what's wrong with that picture? I'm the judge, and you're up there challenging, what we're doing here. That's the public defender's job, right? I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I'm going to tell you, I wish they'd, well, I don't wish because, it would be interesting if they nominated me as a public defender over there, let me tell you, because we'd have a lot of damn cases going to trial. And they don't want that. They want someone who's going to play the game, and that's what they've got. Somebody who, one of our monitors over there one day went in and just sat and listened, and they're like, who is this person, So somebody followed them out to their car and got their license to see who they were. Well, who do you think followed them out there? Was it the judge or the judge's secretary? No, it was a public defender. So I'm not happy at all with that situation, but wasn't my call. So, but the public defenders, that is supposed to be the person or the entity that comes in and saves these people who cannot afford an attorney, right? That's the idea, at least. It just doesn't work out that way when the public defender works for the judge. But anyway, what do you do? So we were able to get some changes, but I really saw a lot of changes across the state, a lot of policy changes, because again, their big fear is that somebody's going to come in and file one of these lawsuits and herd their client through and get them to trial or on appeal, get an unfavorable ruling for the city. That's their big fear, because an unfavorable ruling for one city is going to probably open the floodgates for a lot of lawsuits that will be very, very costly and time consuming. And so that's their big fear, and they are, we've got them running scared on that at least. I know that there were changes because I got a lot of calls. I had at least 3 district court judges call me on the down low, can't say their names, but they had at least 3 call me and tell me, man, this was, some of them were delighted to see it. They saw other judges doing wrong, and they were delighted to see it. I had a prosecutor from Eastern Arkansas call me. I knew him. I had recently had a case against him. He prosecuted my client, and I was the defense attorney. And he calls me up, and the case was over. I thought, why am I getting a call from this guy for? He says, man, I sure appreciate that lawsuit y'all brought. I said, why is that? He's quite a ways over in East Arkansas. I said, right after that lawsuit got filed, he said, I married a woman who had has a daughter who's grown and has her own children. And he said 6 or 7 years ago, she wrote checks for 2 pizzas, 2 checks for 2 pizzas on 2 different occasions. And since then, she has paid every month and spent time in jail and still owed thousands, just like I described earlier. And he said, suddenly, that lawsuit hit the news, and it was in the Arkansas Times and everything. And she went down to her next court date, and they said, we're done with you. You're done. Goodbye. And I heard about several of those things. Some of the local attorneys at Little Rock District Court and North Little Rock District Court and different places, they said, we've completely revamped our system. There are now, checks in place to make sure that we inquire as to this person's ability to pay before we assess all these fines. So I was happy to be involved with it, and in spite of the fact that it was on track to be dismissed, I think that we did well. I made myself some notes here and I haven't looked at them yet, so let me look here and see if there's anything I wanted to say. I have a tendency just to run off and never look at my notes. One of the things is that I have it down here last, but I certainly want to say this. Right after we settled this, another attorney came in and he called me several times and picked my brain about, and he was reading the pleadings. and it's a local attorney, or not really a local attorney, but a guy named Mike Lowe came in, and he found some people that he thinks fit the criteria as the federal judge used to knock our guys out. So he's filed another lawsuit, so they're facing that one again. As far as I don't know how it's going, I haven't talked to him recently, but that's how it goes, isn't it? It takes time, and just like Rosa Parks, you find the right person in the right situation, and you hit them, hard, and it's going to happen. I have confidence. My confidence has been shaken lately, I'll admit, with the president that we have. I've been concerned about that, but I still remain confident that overall, in time, we're going to get through this. If there's one thing that concerns me that I wish everyone would focus on, it's this public defender issue. Our public defenders are underpaid. There's not enough of them, because it's just not a popular platform. When you're a politician and you say, hey, I want money to defend criminals, that's tough, see? And these public defenders, the first thing is they don't pay very much, so they kind of get sort of the worst attorneys, although I'm not saying there's no good attorneys at the public defender's office, because there are, but they have a tendency to be lower paid attorneys. And then to congratulate them with that low pay, they give them a workload that's just impossible. So if you are wondering who you want to vote for in your next election, ask that person, what is their feeling about our situation with the public defenders, because the public defender situation in Arkansas is horrible. And if it weren't for the lawyers group in Washington and some of these attorneys that in New York and our local ACLU, these lawsuits just wouldn't happen. Lawyers like me can't afford to bring them. These are very expensive lawsuits. I didn't fund this lawsuit. And so that's what happened at Sherwood. But Sherwood just got picked because they were low-hanging fruit. There is a lot of this going on, still going on. And so I appreciate the ACLU for the work that they did on it, and I appreciate them bringing me into it. And I'm going to let the next person go here so we don't run out of time.
You mind if I add to your
Absolutely not.
reforms
Yeah.
in Sherwood? So I brought this Know Your Rights in District Court guide specifically for Sherwood. I don't know if, thank you. If we could, there's plenty for everyone here. But it talks about what they agreed to do, and then what people need to know before they go to district court in Sherwood specifically. So they agreed to halt the jailing of people who can't pay court debts, and they also agreed to conduct an individualized evaluation of whether or not you can pay, which of course they weren't doing before. Well, depending on who you ask, they weren't doing before this lawsuit. And they agreed to halt revocation of driver's licenses for failure to pay court debts, to ensure the right to counsel, which Reggie talked about. You can receive a sentence of community service when you can't pay the fine instead of a fine. And you should be able to adjust your payment schedule or waive remaining payments if you fall behind on those payments. So.
Yeah, that licensing, the suspending their driver's license. I mean, think about that for a minute. You're poor, you're behind, so let's suspend your driver's license. You can't get to work. Where are we, people? I'm sorry.
No, that's good. You
just
covered that topic for me very well. I appreciate that. Well, and there were a couple of good bills last session on driver's license suspensions. Some of them passed and some of them didn't. One of them that did pass was a waiver for driver's license reimbursement or reinstatement fees. So it was very specific people, though. It was really narrow law. If you go through drug court, veterans court, homeless court, or something called Hope Court, which I think maybe exists in one city in Arkansas, you can, if you have multiple driver's licenses, every time your license is suspended for failure to pay or failure to appear, you get a new $100 reinstatement fee. So this law allows you to, if you've paid all of your fines and fees and finished your sentence, And if you've gone through one of these specialty courts, you can have all but one reinstatement fee waived. Now, of course, we would prefer that that be open to everyone because a lot of these are happening in like hot check courts or in traffic courts. And like he said, it makes no sense to suspend people's driver's license because they couldn't show up in court or couldn't pay. So I would like to see that expanded to include everyone, not just people who go through specialty courts. Another bill tried to prohibit driver's license suspensions for anything that's not motor vehicle related, and that didn't make it too far, but I have hope that it could happen again. One big thing I wanted to talk about that has to do with housing in Arkansas is the failure to vacate statute. Arkansas is the only state in the nation to criminalize the failure to pay rent. So if you miss a payment of rent or your landlord doesn't like you and wants you to leave, they can allege in court that you, or with a prosecutor, that you have failed to pay your rent, and your only defense to that is, yes, I did pay my rent. You can't, for example, say, well, I'm living in a really terrible apartment with no running water, no heat, no air conditioning. You can't allege any of that and say that's why, that's why I didn't pay my rent. It's if you paid your rent, you have a defense. If you didn't pay your rent, you are guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. So you can, of course, be fined and potentially face jail time, either because you were too poor or, well, there's a million reasons. The other thing about this statute is Arkansas is the only state with no implied warranty of habitability, which goes along with that non-defense I was just talking about. You can't withhold rent because your apartment is unlivable. So it allows slumlords to just continue collecting tons of money with no recourse for tenants in that situation. The case that we brought was a man who had, I think it was it PTSD or some kind of mental illness, and his doctor prescribed a support animal for him, which he has a right to under fair housing laws, and he talked to his landlord about it, and his landlord was going to require a non-refundable pet deposit. And he didn't think that was right, so he called Arkansas Fair Housing Commission, and they talked to the landlord and told them that that wasn't allowed, and then the landlord sent the tenant's rent check back to him and said, you have 10 days to leave. And so he came to the ACLU, he got an attorney, but unfortunately he did leave, because what do you do when someone tells you you have 10 days to leave or you're gonna be prosecuted for a crime? You leave. I mean, what else can you do? So there were two issues with that case. One was that he did leave, and the other was that the legislature sort of they tweaked the law. So the case got mooted. But what happened when the legislature changed the law, they didn't make it better. In fact, in some ways it's worse. It's now a new offense for every single day that you stay over without paying your rent. So every day that you stay in that apartment is a new misdemeanor. There's just, basically unlimited fines and fees that you can rack up because of that. And again, your only defense is, I paid my rent. We believe this is a civil dispute that should be in civil court just like it is in every other state in the country. I think that's all I have to say about that. I could probably talk forever about that. That's obviously a huge housing issue in Arkansas. It has been declared unconstitutional by 3 different circuit courts, but they haven't been appealed, so it's not a statewide ban. And it is we know it's being prosecuted at least in a couple of places. So if anyone has any issues, with that, then we'd love for you to contact us. We'd love to help you with that. So then panhandling and homeless evictions are a couple of other issues that criminalize poverty in the state and in several municipalities. The state has a panhandling law that we are challenging currently, and several cities have or have had panhandling laws, anti-panhandling laws. And the issue here, this is not a popular, we're not exactly popular for taking up this issue, even with people who are our friends usually. But people don't seem to understand that, not every illness or disability is visible. You can't say that just because someone can stand on a street corner a couple days a week, they should be able to work, because that's not true for a lot of people, and it's not true for our clients. Some people have mental illnesses, some people have autoimmune disorders that you can't see, and they can't go to work every single day of the week, but they can go stand out on the corner and make enough money at least to eat for the week, and maybe even pay rent, maybe feed their kids. And then, of course, there are First Amendment issues with that, but the big issue is that you can't just prohibit panhandling and expect them to go away. The problem is still there. And the same thing applies to homeless evictions on private property. Cities like Little Rock are using code enforcement divisions to kick people off of private property with or without the knowledge and consent of the owners of that property. Sometimes they go because the owner has complained. Sometimes they go because a neighbor or someone else has complained. Honestly, I'm not sure that they are always acting off of a complaint, or maybe they're acting on their own at times. But essentially what the city of Little Rock has done is to criminalize homelessness, because there's no camping in public, and if you can't camp on private property, then where do you go? They may say, well, you go to a shelter, but there aren't enough shelter beds for everyone, no matter how much the city tries to say that there are. And a lot of these shelters require you to pay some amount, even if you stay a certain amount of time, or even just for a night. So it's not a good option. And I think a lot of people want, they want things to look clean and nice in the city, but again, the way to solve the problem of panhandling and homelessness is not to outlaw it, it's to help people. Better housing resources, better government programs that, again, help people who can't work or can't find housing. I think that may be all I have to say.
Okay. Well, my topic today is on credit.